Now we're going to take a look at the lighting options that we have available within xStream, and some of the things you can do and some of the things you can't do when working with the two programs. I just have a blank scene right now, so I want to go up to New Scene, select just the default will work right now. I'm not going to keep the Lightwave default light and camera, and now we can see our view scene showing up. Swap over to our view interface, and I want to focus on our camera view and refresh our OpenGL. And I'm just going to reposition the camera, go back to Lightwave, it refreshes. Under options, we want to make sure our scale ratio is set to 10. And first let's take a look at the major light, the main scene light. So if we go to our lights, we can currently see we have the view light. We're going to change to our perspective view so we can see that light a little better. Right now everything's really small, so I'm going to change our grid size by hitting the right bracket key. And now we can see that a little bit larger. And one thing to keep in mind is the way our light reacts to our camera, mainly in its positional settings. We're going to take a look at that within the view interface. And what we want to do is select our sunlight, and we can see that currently we have point at camera turned on. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn this off right now, and we're going to switch back to Lightwave in Layout. And now if we select our light and switch to our rotation mode, and I start to rotate around this object, we're going to see it basically stays in the same place, and we can see it rotating around. With a little bit of glitchiness in there, but overall it usually works quite well. But this will be changing and modifying the sun within the view scene, and now we can see it's much brighter. And now if we take a look at point at camera on, I'll go ahead and turn that on, and now we see it has updated our sun and where it was at in the scene, and that's because this is based on position. So now we have it set in the position where it would normally be in our view scene, depending on its rotation. And if I start to rotate this object around, we'll start to see it modifying the position as it would within the view scene. So basically where the sun is at relative to the camera based on its rotation. So you can choose whether or not you'd like to have that turned on or off. Usually turned on is a little bit easier, especially when we're switching back and forth between the programs. We can go back and we can see that our light is in the correct position, and especially if you're going to be modifying where the sun is directly. But we could just move this around, and you can see it's glitching just a little because it's updating exactly where the position is. But this can be helpful if you want to have the sun where it should be. And of course, the position of a distant light doesn't really matter, and it's really the rotation that matters. So this is a way of modifying both position and rotation, although the actual position of the light does not matter when it comes to how it's lighting the scene, just how we modify this light, whether we're in view or in Lightwave. And also keep in mind that when we move our camera, the light will go along with it. And this is really nice because that way, no matter where our camera is and how much we've animated it, we can always find the light because it'll always be right next to that camera. And sometimes it can be difficult to find your lights in a scene because where the camera is positioned and the size of the scene. But this way, with our overall length and the way that the lights work directly within view, we're able to move that light with the camera. And also if we rotate this, we can see its position is relative to where that sun would normally be in our scene. Now if we take a look in our scene, it is refreshed, and we can see that our light has completely synced up to the rotation options that we had created within LW's interface. If we select our sunlight, and we're going to look for it in our scene. We can see it is directly above us. And let's go ahead and move it down a little more so we can see that update as well. Go back into Lightwave, take a look through our camera view, see that that's synced up. Go to perspective, and we're going to select our light. I'm going to change our grid size a little bit more. Make that just a little bit easier to see. Now we can select our light, and I'm going to rotate our pitch. And mainly we can see that right now it's not correctly rotating itself. It's kind of stopping at a certain point and then coming back. And I'm going through the full range of motion right now, but we're not seeing the changes that we need. So I can undo that, and now if I select it just with the free range and not using our controllers, I'm able to completely rotate this where I need it to go. It does take a sec to refresh with the point camera on. If we turn that off, then the light is going to stay in the correct place and it won't move around the scene. But let's go back into view, and now we can see it's updating. The sun's a little bit lower. We'll move that down a little bit more. We can see it's much lower in the sky now. We'll update our preview render, and we can see that showing up more towards the horizon. So it's usually not a good idea in this case to use the different controllers for pitch and bank. Although right now it seems to be working, I still reach that point where I'm sort of unable to bring it beyond a certain area, and that's just because of the way it updates itself and moves its position around. And now that I've undid that last movement that kind of threw it off, the sun's actually not in the position that it was before. So move that around. Now we can see the sun is in the correct position. Let's go ahead and select that sunlight, turn off point at camera, and modify some of the settings this way. So we'll go ahead and point this down, and we'll take a look at the sunlight. And now what we can see is happening is the sun is not showing up correctly within the view scene as far as its OpenGL preview. So if you like to modify the sun with the OpenGL preview and sort of move it around, then you have to make sure that point at camera is on, because otherwise, like right now, if I go ahead and move this, normally that would rotate it through the sky, but what's currently happening is it's just moving around the sun, but it's not really doing anything because it's not modifying our rotation. If we turn point at camera on, now we can see that the position is relative to where the OpenGL preview is within the view interface, and we go back and we can see that's updating correctly. So sometimes it's a good idea to have it on, sometimes off. It really depends on how you want to display the light. If you like to move it around within the sky to really position that, then you're going to want to make sure that point at camera is on, because if it's off and we move it, and then we go into Lightwave, and we take a look at the overall view, we can see that it hasn't actually rotated the camera or put it in the correct position where we moved it to. So that's just something to keep in mind. Let's take a look at the light panel. So we're going to open up Lights, click Properties, and now we can see all of our different light properties. We can see that this is named View Light. It is our distant light. Our light intensity is currently 100%. Let's take a look at our sunlight value and some of its different settings. And we can see, mainly because of the type of atmosphere we're working with, we don't have the option to change the overall intensity of that directly within the panel itself, like we do with some of the other lights. We're going to go up to the atmosphere editor, and we can take a look and see our light color and what is currently showing up. I'm going to go ahead and just change this to a blue. Click OK. Now the color of the actual sunlight itself has not been modified, but the overall scene does look a little more of that light color. We're going to go into the options for our light, and we can see the light color is changing to a blue look, which means all of our lights and objects within Lightwave will be affected by that light. And we'll go ahead and load some in so we can take a look at the different lighting options. But we can see that our color is not changed to that blue, and this one is a little bit separate. We'll go ahead and change these values. I'll just do a manual edit color, and we're gonna type in 255 on the RGB values to get a full white. And let's just load in a quick object in both of our programs. We'll just use a simple sphere because that is going to show us the different diffusion values and an overall good lighting amount. And now I just have a sphere I loaded in, and this is a Lightwave sphere. And I want to change our perspective view to shaded solid so we can see that a little better. Go to our camera view, and we want to make sure that we're positioning this correctly so that when we render, we'll be able to see that. I'm going to select our sphere and move that upward. And another thing to keep in mind, this is an error that you're seeing right now where the camera is moving around erratically. That is caused by the fact that I was right mouse clicking, which would normally edit the bank of the camera. Now when you're working with the camera in the view camera and you try to modify the bank by actually doing it in the interface, what happens is the camera kind of jumbles around a bit and it's very hard to control. It does not bank like a normal Lightwave camera will. And if I go back into the view interface and we take a look at our main camera, we can see we have always keep level on. So I'm going to turn that off. Go back into Lightwave, and now with the view camera, it may or may not work. So if I try banking it right now, we can see it is still not working. So it might be a bug that's possibly related to the keep camera level value. It might be something else. Basically, it is very difficult to modify that. And that could partially be because of when we actually try to modify the handle. So I'm going to undo that. And that's sort of the same problem we were having before with our light when we tried modifying it directly with the handles, where we had it sort of a little glitchy. You can notice though that the heading does work correctly, and so does the pitch. Although once we reach certain values, it does start to sort of glitch a little bit. So mainly that's something you want to do in the viewports, kind of looking around, and not something directly as we're seeing the modifications within the perspective view. So if you do need to bank the camera, you can go ahead and type in a value of 25, which actually increased the value to 335. So that's a little bit of a problem that there currently is with the camera. Although if you modify the main camera directly within view itself, you should be able to successfully roll it. So let's just adjust the roll setting, go into Lightwave, and now we actually notice, okay, now that it's updated correctly. A second ago it was facing the wrong direction, and you can see that as I'm switching between the two programs, we're actually getting some errors with which way it is facing, and it's actually going the wrong way. And as I just kind of go back and forth, we're just seeing some very strange problems caused by this camera rotation. So you might want to stay away from the roll and the bank settings, at least natively, or when working directly with the view camera. And there are, of course, ways to get around that. One major way is definitely just to use a Lightwave camera. And we'll take a look at that and using the different Lightwave cameras a little bit later. What we can also do is always parent them together and have one just completely track the other one. In that way, the major rotation is there, and we don't have to worry about losing those bank settings. Okay, look, back to working with our light. We got a little bit sidetracked there. Let's go ahead and zoom out. And we want to modify the surface of this sphere that we have. So I'm going to go to the surface editor, and I'm going to change our color to more of a white value. And we can see it's showing up as blue, and that's because of our light color is currently set to blue. I'm going to turn on smoothing and add a little bit of a specular effect. Turn down our glossiness, just something that looks a little bit better. Move our camera into place. And we're going to go back into view. And I want to modify our aspect ratio. And let's modify it in Lightwave and take a look. We're going to change this to HD TV 1280 by 720. We're going to go back into view, and if we take a look, we can tell that that has not updated. And if we go back into Lightwave, it's been reset. So you basically, when you're working with the view camera, it really is a view camera. Although it has a lot of the different options available within Lightwave, and of course is rendering directly within Lightwave, you still have to change specific values directly within view in order to get it to work correctly. Oh, make sure that's 16 by 9. And now we can see it's updating. Of course, if we go back into the camera, we can also see that we can change our anti-aliasing values. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to a 3-pass right now, just using the classic camera. And right now, just with the view scene and no real view objects other than the ground, infinite plane, I want to go ahead and render this out. And you can normally hit F9 to render the current frame, so you could hit that and render. Right now, I'm not able to because of the recording program. But I can go to the Render tab and select Render Frame. But I also want to go to our Render Globals and just make sure things are set up in here correctly, because we have a different set of resolution within the Render Globals. And I'm going to change our preview and just make sure that is on. It was currently on, and our image viewer is set so that we'll be able to see the frame when it is finished rendering. And right now I'm just going to go ahead and render a frame out. And we can see just that Lightwave object on top of our infinite ground plane with the shadow nicely showing up directly on our ground plane. And the overall render looks pretty good, although there are a couple of problems. And if you notice, the ground plane is really not blue. And since we're working with a sphere that's typically a white color, and that's not showing up the same way as the ground plane, which means the sort of connection that we have between our light colors is a little bit different. So to show that a little bit better, we'll go into view, and I'm going to add a sphere, and I just need to find out where that was created and put it directly in front of our camera. And I am going to size that up. Ooh, undo. To kind of match the sphere we have within Lightwave. And keep in mind too, we're working with a really large scene right now at this point, where we can see the scale of this sphere is actually about 53 meters. So we're seeing some of the atmospheric effects that way. Because once we zoom out to a certain point, we really start to see the fog a bit more. And when we zoom in really close, we won't get to see those values. And that's one of the reasons why I'm in this position and using much larger objects, so that we can see what that overall fog effect is going to look like on all of our different objects. But I'm going to modify our sphere now to sort of match the color that we have within Lightwave. So I'm going to switch back to Lightwave, go to our surface editor, and under the sphere, I'm going to change our color to a complete white. And I'm also going to turn off all our specular effects so that we just have something completely flat. And now if we change our color of the surface of our sphere, I will change that to white as well. Click OK, and under highlights, turn that off completely so it's at 0. And now the overall diffusion values are going to look a lot different just because the diffuse and ambient settings they work a little bit differently between the two programs because of course they're separate surface editors. But let's just take a look at what's going on in our scene, and we can see that we definitely do not have a blue sphere as we do for the Lightwave one. So I'm going to go ahead and render another frame. So now that we can see the render, we can tell that of course they're not matching up, which we already kind of knew. But now that we have two spheres, you can see that a little bit better. We do have a correct shadow appearing directly on our sphere, which is nice. And of course this sphere is really low polygon, so of course we don't have that smoothing effect. And if you take a look at the different surfaces, you can see a lot of different effects, and the main reason for that is that ambient value that is available within the view surface editor would be something a little bit different in the surface editor of Lightwave. So those materials aren't going to completely match up for the diffusion values in that area. We also see a much sharper diffuse line, and mainly that's caused by the contrast value that we have set for the view surface. So let's close this out, and we're going to kind of correct this error that we have and change this to sort of get it to match up correctly. I'm going to go into our sphere, and I just want to change under effects our contrast, which is our diffusion contrast. And we can see if we bring it up to hard, we have a very harsh line, which would be similar to if we had a planet. And really that's a way of simulating the size of an object. But I'm going to bring that contrast down to soft, which is all the way down. And it doesn't expand on the area too much. If we go into Lightwave and take a look at its surface editor, and the way we would modify that setting directly within Lightwave is if we go to the Advanced tab and change our diffusion sharpness. So those are basically the same sorts of different editing techniques that we have between the two surface editors to match up contrasts if we were working with objects in that way. But let's go back and take a look at our light, where we can see that color value. And if we switch over to view, we now want to change that sunlight, because right now that color is set to white, even though in the atmosphere editor we have the light color directly linked to the light color of the view light. So what I can do is copy that color and just paste it on the actual light itself for our sunlight. And we're going to go back into Lightwave, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a smaller render, bringing our multiplier down, and I'll render that frame. And if we take a look at this frame, we can see that the colors are now matching up correctly. And because we changed the actual value of the sunlight itself, it now matches the atmosphere editing light that we have. And if you go to the atmosphere editor tab, we'll be able to open that up directly within Lightwave, which is really nice because that way we can just modify clouds and work on the environmental settings rather than the scene itself. But one thing you notice too is that the light position may not correctly be set in this case. Because if you take a look at the diffusion value, we have a little bit of a curve on the left side, whereas with the view object, it's pretty much straight down the center. And whether or not that's caused by the diffusion, I'm not sure at this point. I would have to do a couple of tests and move it around. But that does show, in this case, there is what does look like a little bit of an offset. So something might have to be modified in that case to get that to show up correctly. But let's move on, and we can take a look at those positional settings of the light a little bit later. And what I want to do is just go to our scene editor and make sure that our view scene is set to shaded solid. We're not seeing the wireframe then. We're going to go back into our light, and we can see our ambient color is currently set to white. If we go to Edit Atmosphere, our ambient light color, if we edit it, is not. So currently right now, even though in our options we have those ambients are supposed to be matched up, so if we go into our options, and we can see match ambient light settings. Currently right now that color is not being transferred, so we can go to Edit Atmosphere, Edit Color, and now since we can't copy these colors directly over, and our overall color selections and all that are going to be a little bit different panels, so we'd have to write down these values and then we can key them in. So we can click OK and OK again and go into our ambient light color, and now we can type in those values and just get that to be exactly the same. And we'll go ahead and render out another frame. And we can see that the darker parts of our object are showing up a little bit better now, in more of a blue tint, and it was a little bit darker before. This is not a huge change, just because of the lightness value of that ambient setting. But it is matching a little bit better. If we go back to our view interface, I'm going to modify our sphere and take a look at its surface and turn down that ambient value. And now we can see it actually looks about the same. If we increase our diffusion value all the way up, we see an overall brightness. If we go into our atmosphere editor, I'm going to turn on global illumination now, so we're working with that setting. And I'll change our diffusion back to 60. And mainly these are just sort of comparing the surface editors to each other and how the objects themselves are going to render. So typically if you had two objects with the same surface, you would want to be doing that within the native program to that surface and kind of copy that over to the other one. And we can see by turning down that ambient value, it did modify it a little. And now we can see also with the global illumination on that the shadows are a little bit lighter in the areas outside of the bottoms of our objects themselves. And we're going to move on and take a look at some of the other lights that we have. Now if we were to create a light within Lightwave, let's just go to our lights panel and we can add in a point light. And I'm going to switch this to move. We can see that it's affecting our Lightwave object, but currently not affecting our view object. If we go into view, we can still see that there's only the sunlight. And now our lights will match up back and forth, but we have to make sure that we create them directly within view. So what I'm going to do is just delete this light, making sure I use the minus key, clear the light from the scene, switch into view, and now I can add in a point light into view, move that into position so that we can see it, down into our camera view. And now once we switch to Lightwave, we can see that a new light has been created. And this is called ViewLight_1. And now as I move this light around, we can see it affecting both the Lightwave object and our view object. and it has all the same settings that our lights within Lightwave have. And currently right now this is a point light, and not all of the lights are available within view that we have available within Lightwave. Mainly our linear lights. If we take a look, our distant lights are the same as our sunlight, point lights are the exact same, and spotlights are the exact same. And then we also have an area light option within Lightwave. Let's go ahead and just modify this first and change this into a spotlight. And now if we switch back into view, we can tell that that is still a point light. So we have modified that view light to become a spotlight, but it is still showing up as a point, and once we went back into view, it switched back and forth. So you really want to make sure you're doing your major modifications within view if you want the lights to work back and forth between the programs, where you have them being created in both the view interface and the Lightwave interface. Let's go now and create a light panel, and I'm going to size this up using the size gizmo, and we're going to switch over to Lightwave, and now we can see we have a new light in there. It's still viewlight _ 1, and it is showing up as a point light. You can change that to an area light, and then when we switch between the two programs, it seems to be staying. We'll go ahead and size that up to match, mainly just for the visual. See our light panel. Let's just move around our camera a little. Go back into Lightwave, and now it is still matching up correctly. So our light panel and the area light will be similar in both of the programs. So that's a very nice feature that we have. We can see they're both pointing in the correct direction. If we go ahead and rotate this around and take a look, we can see it's really not rotating it. If we rotate it within the view interface, then it is going to match up correctly. So all of your rotation values you kind of want to do within view for the area lights. With point lights it's not going to matter too much, but let's go ahead and just remove those from the scene, and we're going to add in a spotlight this time. And now we can see that has refreshed, and we have a gigantic spotlight in here. So I'm just going to change our grid value. Let's go ahead and move this light around. We can see that it's currently not allowing me to rotate or move this light directly within Lightwave. If I come into view and modify it, then it will update correctly. So currently right now we will not be able to move around our spotlights, but we can modify them directly within view and still see them and edit their settings. If we go to our light panel and change the properties, we'll still be able to modify all those settings as we normally would. So let's delete that spotlight. We're going to go back and add in another point light. Select our lights. Let's go to our perspective view. And currently right now that is locked as well, and it's not allowing me to move it. So it could possibly be just from switching all of those lights back and forth between each other. But normally we're able to modify that.